Maya Johnson woke to the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through her window, illuminating her small yet cozy bedroom. Today was no ordinary day. It marked a significant milestone in her career as the first black woman to hold the rank of general in the armed forces. She had worked tirelessly to reach this point, and now she was about to attend an important event at a local gym, where military officials would gather to discuss community engagement and fitness initiatives. As she prepared for the day, Maya felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Standing in front of her mirror, she adjusted her crisp white blouse and dark slacks. The outfit was casual yet professional, reflecting her commitment to both her military duties and the message of empowerment she wanted to convey. Her natural hair, styled in a neat bun, showcased her determination and confidence. With a final glance at her reflection, Maya grabbed her bag and headed out the door, a sense of purpose in her stride. The drive to the gym was filled with thoughts of the inspiring speeches she hoped to hear and the connections she would make. As she parked and walked toward the entrance, she noticed a few early morning gym-goers glancing in her direction. Some looked curious, while others appeared indifferent. Maya had learned to accept such mixed reactions over the years. After all, breaking barriers came with its share of challenges. Upon entering the gym, the bustling atmosphere enveloped her. The sounds of weights clanking, treadmills whirring, and chatter filled the air. Staff members greeted her with friendly smiles, but she could sense a few lingering glances from others nearby. Maya brushed it off, reminding herself of the importance of her presence there. She made her way to the designated area, where banners proudly displayed the event's title, Strength in Unity. The space was decorated with flags representing various branches of the military, and a stage was set up at the front for the speakers. Maya felt a surge of pride as she thought about the event's purpose: to encourage physical fitness and collaboration between the military and the community. She spotted a few familiar faces among the military personnel already gathered, exchanging warm greetings and handshakes. As the event began, Maya took her place among her peers, ready to engage with the audience and share her journey. The atmosphere was charged with energy, and Maya felt a sense of belonging among those who shared her commitment to service and leadership. She was eager to speak about the importance of representation in the military and how community programs could inspire the next generation of leaders. Just as the opening remarks started, Maya's attention drifted to a group of individuals near the entrance. They were dressed in police uniforms, and their presence seemed out of place amid the military personnel. She couldn't help but notice the tension in the air as they exchanged whispers among themselves. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, Maya refocused on the stage, where the keynote speaker began discussing the values of teamwork and resilience. But as the speaker's words echoed in her ears, a knot formed in Maya's stomach. She had faced discrimination before, and the unsettling looks from the police officers reminded her that not everyone would welcome her success. Her thoughts spiraled as she listened to the inspiring words, thinking about the barriers she had to overcome in her career. If only everyone understood that her presence was not just about breaking barriers, but about paving the way for others. As the speeches continued, Maya's mind flickered back to the police officers. Their earlier whispers transformed into pointed stares, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She brushed it off, reminding herself that today was about her achievements and the impact she wanted to make. Suddenly, the event's atmosphere shifted. A commotion erupted near the entrance as the police officers approached her, their faces set in stern expressions. Maya's heart raced, realizing that the day, which had begun with promise, was about to take an unexpected turn. The energy in the gym shifted abruptly as the two police officers made their way toward Maya. Their heavy boots echoed against the floor, each step amplifying the tension that now filled the room. Maya stood still, her instincts kicking in, but she maintained her composure, confident that this misunderstanding would be cleared up quickly. After all, she was there as a guest of honor. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice laced with authority. "May I ask what you're doing here?" Maya blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She glanced around, noticing a few curious onlookers who had also picked up on the abrupt confrontation. The event was continuing on the stage, but the officer's presence created an undeniable distraction. "I'm here for the military event," Maya replied, her tone calm but firm. She extended her hand toward the banner behind her, hoping it would serve as enough explanation. The officer's eyes narrowed, glancing at her hand and then back to her face. His partner stood a few feet behind, crossing his arms, as if waiting for Maya to say something incriminating. "Do you have any identification?" the officer asked, his gaze lingering on her with suspicion. Maya's brow furrowed. The question was unnecessary. No one else had been asked for ID upon entering the gym. She felt her pulse quicken, but kept her voice steady. "I do, but is there a reason why I'm being singled out?" "I've already checked in with the event staff." The officer's expression hardened. "It's just a routine check," he said, the edge in his voice growing sharper. "You don't seem like you belong here." The word stung, even though Maya had faced this type of treatment before. She had hoped that in this professional setting, her achievements would speak for themselves. But once again, her appearance had raised questions that should never have been asked. "I'm General Maya Johnson," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm one of the speakers for today's event." For a moment, there was silence. The officer blinked, clearly taken aback by the title, but his surprise quickly faded, replaced by a smirk that unsettled Maya even more. "General, huh?" he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Well, if you're really who you say you are, let's see some ID." Maya hesitated, knowing that producing her ID would only serve to validate the officer's assumption that she didn't belong. But at the same time, she wanted to avoid any escalation. She reached into her bag and pulled out her military ID, handing it to the officer. He studied the card for a moment before handing it back with a dismissive shrug. "Looks legit," he said, but the condescension in his voice was undeniable. "But we'll still need to ask you a few more questions." Before Maya could respond, the second officer stepped forward, his demeanor even more aggressive than his partner's. "Why don't you come with us outside?" he said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. Maya's heart sank. This was escalating far too quickly, and she could feel the eyes of everyone around her. She knew that if she left the gym with them, the situation would spiral out of control. Her rank and position might not save her once they were outside. "No," she said firmly, squaring her shoulders. "I've done nothing wrong, and I'm not going anywhere." The room seemed to hold its breath as the officers exchanged glances. The tension was palpable, and Maya could feel her pulse racing in her ears. She stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated, but she knew this confrontation was far from over. One of the officers, visibly frustrated, took a step closer to her, his hand moving toward the handcuffs on his belt. "You're resisting, ma'am," he said in a low, dangerous tone. "I suggest you comply." Maya's mind raced. This wasn't about compliance anymore. It was about power, and they were determined to make an example of her. She took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling between standing her ground and avoiding further escalation. "I'm not resisting," she said carefully, "but I won't let you treat me like a criminal." Before the officer could respond, the commotion had drawn the attention of the military officials nearby. One of them, a high-ranking colonel, approached with a look of confusion and concern. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze flickering between Maya and the officers. The officer stepped back slightly, but his expression remained hostile. "Just doing our job," he muttered. The colonel gave Maya a brief, understanding nod, "This is General Johnson," he said, his voice filled with authority. "She's one of the key speakers for today's event." For the first time, the officers seemed to falter. They exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of the situation finally beginning to sink in. But Maya could tell this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The tension in the gym was thick, and Maya felt every pair of eyes in the room on her. The officers hesitated for a moment, glancing between Maya and the colonel, but their posture remained rigid. It was clear they weren't backing down. "Well, general or not, we still need to make sure everything is in order," the officer who had spoken first said, his tone edging on defiance. He seemed to ignore the colonel's presence entirely. Maya's chest tightened. The situation had escalated far beyond what was reasonable, and she could feel the simmering frustration building inside her. She clenched her fist but maintained her composure, determined not to give them any more reason to act on whatever prejudice fueled their behavior. "Enough of this," the colonel said sharply, stepping between Maya and the officers. His authoritative voice cut through the tension, but it didn't seem to have the desired effect on the two policemen. "You've confirmed her identity. That's all you need to know." The lead officer, clearly irked, looked directly at Maya, his expression hardening. "She's still coming with us." Before anyone could react, the officer grabbed Maya's arm roughly, his grip tight and unyielding. The sharpness of the movement sent a wave of shock through her, and in an instant, the room erupted into chaos. Maya gasped, yanking her arm back in instinctive resistance, but the officer's grip only tightened. "Let go of me," she snapped, trying to free herself from his hold. She had endured countless situations like this before, but never had she been treated so brazenly, so openly, while in uniform. The second officer, seeing the commotion, jumped into action. Without warning, he shoved Maya, pushing her off balance. She stumbled, catching herself against a nearby bench. But before she could regain her footing, both officers were on her, manhandling her as though she were some common criminal. "Stop it," she yelled, her voice laced with fury and disbelief. This was beyond humiliating. It was an assault on her dignity, her very identity as a leader and officer in the armed forces. The colonel, visibly outraged, tried to intervene, but the officers were too caught up in their aggression. A few of the event attendees rushed over, shouting at the officers to stop, but their voices were drowned out by the chaotic scuffle. Maya fought back, not with the intent to harm, but simply to defend herself against the unprovoked attack. Her heart raced as she felt the roughness of their hands, the cold steel of the handcuffs clamping down on her wrists with a painful snap. The world around her blurred, and for a moment, all she could focus on was the overwhelming sense of injustice. She was being treated like a threat, like an enemy, in the very space where she had been invited as an honored guest. As they forced her toward the exit, the weight of the humiliation began to sink in. She was being paraded in front of everyone, her peers, her colleagues, and strangers alike, as if she were guilty of something. But the guilt lay with the men who had refused to see her for who she truly was. Outside, the officers shoved her into the back of a squad car, the slam of the door echoing through the quiet morning. Maya sat there, her wrists aching from the cuffs, her mind reeling from what had just happened. She had spent her entire career breaking barriers, fighting for respect in a system that had been built to keep her down. But now, in a single moment, all of that hard-earned respect felt shattered. Through the window, she could see a crowd forming at the entrance of the gym. The colonel stood among them, visibly furious, shouting something at the officers who were now standing by the car. But Maya couldn't make out the words. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart and the quiet click of the door as one of the officers got into the driver's seat. "Stay calm, General," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her breathing. But it was hard to stay calm when the reality of what had just happened was so blatantly unjust. And yet, despite the pain, the embarrassment, and the anger, Maya knew this wasn't over. Not yet. As the squad car sped away from the gym, Maya sat in the back seat, her hands still bound by the cuffs. Her wrist throbbed with pain, but the emotional sting of the humiliation she had just experienced hurt far worse. She stared out the window, watching the city blur by, trying to process how such an event could have unfolded in broad daylight, in front of military officers who should have stood for respect and dignity. The officer in the driver's seat glanced at her through the rear-view mirror. His eyes were cold and different. The other officer in the passenger seat was on his phone, likely reporting the arrest. The silence inside the car was suffocating, but Maya refused to give them the satisfaction of showing any more vulnerability. She straightened her posture, forcing herself to remain composed. These men didn't know who she was. Not really. They saw her only as a black woman, someone they could dominate and dismiss without consequence. But they were about to find out just how wrong they were. At a stoplight, the officer in the passenger seat finally ended his phone call. He twisted in his seat to look at Maya, his expression smug. "You're going to have a lot of explaining to do," he said. "Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer. You're in deep trouble." Maya held his gaze, her face impassive. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with authority. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "I don't care who you say you are," he replied. "You broke the law." Maya's lips tightened into a thin line. "I'm General Maya Johnson," she said, her voice cool and deliberate. "I'm the first black female general in the armed forces, and I was invited to that gym for an event honoring my achievements and service." For a moment, the officer blinked, his confident smirk faltering slightly. He glanced at his partner, who kept his eyes on the road but was clearly listening. The air in the car shifted, the atmosphere thick with the weight of Maya's revelation. "And in case you didn't realize," Maya continued, her voice growing sharper, "the people in that gym were high-ranking military officials. The same people who will now know that you assaulted and humiliated a decorated general for no reason other than your own racist assumptions." The silence that followed was deafening. The officer's smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. He turned back around in his seat, facing forward, as if hoping to escape the sudden realization that was sinking in. Maya watched him, her anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm sure you know how this will end," she added, her voice low and steady. "Once the armed forces get involved, once the media hears about this, your careers are over." The officer in the passenger seat shifted uncomfortably. He muttered something under his breath, but Maya didn't catch it. She could feel the panic rising in both of them. The weight of their mistake was beginning to crush the arrogance that had fueled their actions. The squad car pulled into the parking lot of the police station. As the car came to a stop, neither officer moved. They sat in silence for a few long moments, processing the gravity of the situation they had just created. Maya could almost see the wheels turning in their heads, the realization that their actions were not only illegal but career-ending. The officer in the driver's seat cleared his throat, his voice suddenly unsure. We didn't know," he said quietly, barely audible. Maya's gaze hardened. "You didn't bother to ask." The officer swallowed hard. He turned off the engine, but still, neither man made a move to get out of the car. They were stuck, trapped by their own reckless behavior. And now they were beginning to understand that there was no way out of this. Finally, the officer in the passenger seat spoke, his voice shaky. "Look, maybe we can figure this out. We don't need to involve anyone else." Maya's eyes flashed with anger. "You think you can cover this up?" she asked, incredulous. "After everything you've done?" The officers exchanged desperate glances. They were scrambling now, trying to salvage a situation that was already beyond repair. Maya could see the fear in their eyes, the dawning horror of what they had done and what it would cost them. The officer in the driver's seat finally turned around to face her, his voice pleading. "Please," he said, "if you file a report, we're done. We'll lose everything." Maya's gaze was cold and unforgiving. "You should have thought about that before you decided to treat me like a criminal." The door opened behind her, and another officer came to escort Maya out of the car. As she stepped out, the two men remained in their seats, their faces pale with the realization that their careers, their reputations, and their lives as they knew them were about to unravel. The moment Maya stepped into the police station, she could feel the shift in energy. The officers milling around at their desks stopped what they were doing, staring in confusion at the sight of her. This tall, confident black woman in handcuffs, flanked by two visibly shaken officers. Their discomfort was palpable, but no one said a word. The sergeant behind the front desk raised an eyebrow as the officers approached him. "What's going on here?" he asked, glancing between Maya and her captors. "We, brought her in for questioning." One of the officers stammered, clearly trying to downplay the situation. "There was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Maya said, her voice cutting through the room like ice. She turned to the sergeant, locking eyes with him. "I'm General Maya Johnson, the first black female general in the armed forces. These men assaulted and arrested me for no reason." The sergeant's face drained of color. He looked at Maya, then back at the officers, who were both fidgeting uncomfortably. "General Johnson," he repeated, his voice suddenly strained. It was clear that he recognized her name, or at least the gravity of what had just been revealed. "Yes," Maya confirmed, standing tall despite the cuffs digging into her wrists. "And I expect you to take these handcuffs off immediately." The sergeant didn't hesitate. He motioned to one of the nearby officers, who rushed over with the key. In a matter of seconds, Maya was free. She rubbed her sore wrists, fixing the officers with a glare that could have cut through steel. The sergeant cleared his throat, stepping around the desk to face her. "I deeply apologize, General. This should never have happened." Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked around the room, taking in the silence, the way everyone was watching, waiting to see what she would do next. She could feel the weight of her position, the power she held, not just as a military leader, but as a symbol of resistance against the very injustice she had just endured. "I'm sure you realize," she said finally, her voice calm but firm, "that this will not be swept under the rug. What happened here today was unacceptable, and it will be dealt with accordingly." The sergeant nodded quickly, his face a mask of regret. "Of course, General. We'll cooperate fully with any investigation." Maya gave a curt nod. But before she could say anything else, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, and her heart sank as she saw the flood of notifications. Somehow, the news had already broken. Photos and videos of the incident at the gym were circulating on social media, with hashtags like #GeneralAssaulted and #Racism in Uniform trending within minutes. Maya scrolled through the posts, each one more damning than the last. People were outraged, rightfully so, and the calls for justice were growing louder by the second. Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore. This was a public reckoning, and the entire world was watching. "I'll be leaving now," she said, turning to the sergeant. "But trust me when I say this isn't over." As she walked out of the station, the officers who had arrested her stood frozen, their faces pale and panic-stricken. They knew what was coming. They knew their careers were hanging by a thread, and that thread was about to snap. Outside, Maya was greeted by a barrage of reporters and cameras. The story had spread like wildfire, and the media had descended on the station, eager to get a statement from the woman at the center of the storm. Maya squared her shoulders, stepping into the glare of the flashing cameras. She was tired, emotionally drained from the ordeal, but she knew this was her moment to take control of the narrative. A reporter pushed a microphone toward her, her voice sharp and urgent. "General Johnson, can you tell us what happened? Do you plan to press charges?" Maya paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "What happened today was an abuse of power and a violation of my rights," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "No one, regardless of their rank or status, should ever be treated the way I was today. And yes, I will be pursuing legal action against the officers involved." The crowd buzzed with anticipation, reporters shouting follow-up questions, but Maya kept walking. She had said what needed to be said for now. The rest would play out in time. As she made her way through the throng of people, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a close colleague in the military. "We've got your back," the message read. "The armed forces are already preparing a statement." Maya allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The tides were turning, and the system that had allowed this kind of discrimination to fester for so long was finally being forced to reckon with its failures. And she would make sure the consequences were felt. News outlets across the country exploded with coverage of Maya's story. Every channel, every social media platform was flooded with clips of her calm, commanding presence as she left the police station, and the horrific footage of her being handcuffed and dragged out of the gym. The public reaction was swift and overwhelming. By the time Maya reached her office the next morning, the full weight of the media storm had settled in. Emails and calls poured in from every direction. Journalists requesting interviews, organizations offering support, public figures expressing outrage. The incident had sparked a nationwide conversation about police brutality and systemic racism, one that wasn't going to fade anytime soon. Maya sat behind her desk, scrolling through the headlines. First black female general assaulted by police, read one. Another, a national disgrace. Racism in law enforcement exposed. The images of her in handcuffs were everywhere, a painful reminder of the humiliation she had endured, but also a symbol of resilience and resistance. As she set her phone down, her assistant knocked on the door and entered with a stack of newspapers. "These just came in, General Johnson," she said, placing them on Maya's desk. "And the phone has been ringing nonstop. Do you want me to start scheduling interviews?" Maya shook her head. "Not yet. Let's let things simmer for a bit." She had learned long ago that timing was everything. The public was on her side for now, but rushing into the media frenzy could easily backfire. She needed to control the narrative, not be swept up in it. Her assistant nodded and left the room, leaving Maya to gather her thoughts. She had spent years preparing for moments like this. Not exactly the situation, of course, but crises where calm and calculated decisions were essential. But this was personal. She wasn't just representing the military or her position. She was representing an entire community of people who had been mistreated, ignored, and brutalized for generations. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, but it was also empowering. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she called. The door opened to reveal Colonel Davis, one of her most trusted colleagues. He stepped inside, his expression serious but supportive. "I heard about what happened," he said, sitting across from her. "How are you holding up?" Maya sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm all right, all things considered. But this is far from over." Davis nodded, his brow furrowed. "The military's issuing a statement this afternoon. They're backing you completely. The Pentagon's taking this very seriously." "That's good to hear," Maya replied, relieved but not surprised. She had earned the respect of her peers and superiors over the years, and she knew they wouldn't stand by while she was treated this way. "There's also talk about an internal investigation into the police department," Davis continued. "Word is, the officers involved are already facing suspension. It's only a matter of time before heads start rolling." Maya raised an eyebrow. "I hope so. This isn't just about me, Davis. This is about every black person who's ever been targeted by the police for no reason. I can't let this slide." "I know," he said, his voice soft but firm. "And neither can we. The entire armed forces are behind you on this." Maya gave him a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you." As Davis stood to leave, Maya's phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen. It was her lawyer, Daniel Wells, a brilliant attorney she had worked with for years. This case was about to get a lot more serious. "I've got to take this," she said to Davis. He gave a respectful nod and left the room, closing the door behind him. "Daniel, good to hear from you," Maya said, picking up the call. "Likewise, General. I've been following the situation closely. It's all over the news. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing all right," she replied. "But we need to talk strategy. This can't just be about filing a complaint or pressing charges. It has to be bigger than that." "I agree," Daniel said. "The public's on your side right now, and we can use that to push for real change. I've already started drafting a civil rights lawsuit. We're going after the police department, the individual officers, and anyone else involved in covering this up." Maya nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Good. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." "We'll make sure of it," Daniel promised. "And don't worry, we've got a strong case. The video evidence alone is enough to put those officers in serious trouble. But this is about more than just winning a case. It's about setting a precedent." "I couldn't agree more," Maya said. "Let's make this count." As she hung up the phone, Maya felt a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't just about justice for herself. It was about using her platform and her position to make real, lasting change. The road ahead would be long, but she wasn't walking it alone. She had an entire nation behind her, and she wasn't going to stop until the system that had allowed this to happen was held accountable. Maya's lawsuit was the talk of the nation. News outlets followed the case closely, with every legal development making headlines. As the case gained traction, it became clear that this wasn't just about one woman's fight against police brutality. It had become a symbol of the broader struggle for racial justice in America. Daniel Wells, Maya's lawyer, was relentless in his pursuit of justice. He had taken on many high-profile cases before, but this one was different. It wasn't just about winning in the courtroom. It was about changing the system that had allowed this kind of injustice to thrive for so long. In the weeks that followed the filing of the lawsuit, Maya found herself at the center of a media storm. She gave interviews, attended rallies, and spoke at public events, using her platform to advocate for reforms in law enforcement and accountability for police misconduct. Her message was clear. This was not just about her, but about the countless others who had suffered similar injustices. One evening, after a long day of meetings and public appearances, Maya sat down with Daniel to discuss the next steps in the case. They were in his office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and case files. "We're making good progress," Daniel said, flipping through a thick binder. "The police department is already feeling the pressure. They've put the officers involved on administrative leave. But that's not enough. We need to push for criminal charges." Maya nodded. "I agree. They can't just sweep this under the rug. People need to be held accountable." "We have a strong case," Daniel continued. "The video evidence is damning, and we've got witness statements from people at the gym who saw the whole thing. The officers violated your rights in multiple ways: unlawful arrest, excessive force, racial profiling. It's all there. But will it be enough?" Maya asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "The system doesn't exactly have a great track record when it comes to holding police accountable." "It will be enough," Daniel said firmly. "We're not just fighting this in the courtroom. We're fighting it in the court of public opinion. The public is on your side, Maya. That's a powerful tool." Maya leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "I know, but it's exhausting. Every day, I'm reminded of what happened. I see my face on the news, hear my name in conversations. I'm trying to stay strong, but it's hard." Daniel gave her a sympathetic look. I understand, but you're not alone in this. You've got an entire team behind you. And more importantly, you've got the support of millions of people who believe in what you're fighting for. Maya nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She had come too far to back down now. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about making sure that no one else had to go through what she had. Over the next few months, the case slowly made its way through the legal system. The police department's lawyers tried to delay the proceedings, filing motion after motion to have the case dismissed or postponed. But Daniel was prepared for every tactic they used, and he pushed forward with unwavering determination. As the trial date approached, the tension in the air was palpable. Maya knew that the outcome of this case would have far-reaching implications, not just for her but for the entire country. If they won, it could set a precedent for holding police officers accountable for their actions. If they lost, it would be a devastating blow to the fight for racial justice. The night before the trial, Maya sat in her living room, going over her testimony with Daniel. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but the weight of it still felt overwhelming. "You're going to do great," Daniel said, sensing her anxiety. "Just tell the truth. The facts are on your side." "I know," Maya replied, her voice steady but tense. "It's just, this feels so much bigger than me. I'm not just speaking for myself tomorrow. I'm speaking for everyone who's ever been mistreated by the police. And that's exactly why you're the perfect person to do this," Daniel said. "You've got the strength and the courage to stand up for what's right. And no matter what happens tomorrow, you've already made a difference." Maya smiled faintly. "Thanks, Daniel. That means a lot." As she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Maya thought about the long road that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her journey through the military, the challenges she had overcome, and the injustice she had faced at the hands of those who were supposed to protect and serve. She knew that tomorrow would be one of the most important days of her life, but she also knew that no matter the outcome, she had already won in so many ways. The next morning, as Maya walked into the courthouse, surrounded by her legal team and supporters, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for, and she was ready. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled with spectators, reporters, and legal experts eager to witness the outcome of one of the most high-profile cases in recent memory. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table, her heart pounding as she waited for the jury to return with their verdict. Daniel sat beside her, reviewing his notes one last time, though he didn't seem nervous at all. The jury had been deliberating for nearly 6 hours, and the tension in the room had grown with each passing minute. Maya tried to keep her emotions in check, but the gravity of the moment was undeniable. Everything they had fought for came down to this. Finally, the door to the jury room opened and the 12 jurors filed back into the courtroom. Maya held her breath as the judge addressed the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, standing with a folded piece of paper in her hands. Maya's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the entire nation's eyes on her in that moment. The foreperson handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge read it silently before handing it back to the foreperson to announce. "In the case of Maya Turner versus the Police Department of Johnson City, we find in favor of the plaintiff," the foreperson said, her voice steady and clear. "We award compensatory damages in the amount of $10 million and punitive damages in the amount of $5 million. A wave of relief washed over Maya as she heard the words. They had won. Justice had been served. The courtroom erupted into whispers and murmurs. Maya looked over at Daniel, who gave her a triumphant smile. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." Maya blinked back tears as the reality of the moment sank in. This was more than just a legal victory. It was a statement, a message that injustice would not go unchecked, that accountability was possible, even for those in positions of power. After the verdict was announced, Maya stepped outside the courthouse to find a massive crowd of supporters waiting for her. They cheered and applauded as she walked down the steps, her head held high. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. But Maya was too overwhelmed to respond. She had never expected to become the face of such a movement, but here she was, standing in the center of a moment that would go down in history. As Maya made her way through the crowd, she couldn't help but think of the officers who had wronged her. Their actions had not only cost them their jobs, but their reputations as well. In the days following the incident, the police department had launched an internal investigation, and it was expected that criminal charges would soon follow. The officers had been suspended without pay, and their careers were effectively over. Public opinion had turned against them, and they were now facing the consequences of their actions in a way that few officers ever had before. But for Maya, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about seeing those officers punished. It was about something much bigger, a fight for justice, for accountability, for the countless others who had been wronged by a system that so often protected the guilty while ignoring the suffering of the innocent. Later that evening, Maya sat down with her family to reflect on everything that had happened. They were gathered in her living room, the atmosphere one of quiet celebration. "I'm so proud of you, Maya," her mother said, her eyes filled with emotion. "You stood up for yourself and for so many others." Maya smiled softly. "It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't back down. Not after everything that happened." Her father nodded. "You've made history, Maya. You've opened the door for change." "I hope so," Maya replied. "This fight isn't over yet. There's still so much work to be done, but I'm ready for it." In the days that followed, Maya continued to use her platform to advocate for police reform and accountability. She spoke at rallies, met with lawmakers, and worked with civil rights organizations to push for systemic change. Her story had become a catalyst for a larger movement, and she was determined to see it through. As Maya looked toward the future, she knew that her life would never be the same, but she also knew that she had found her purpose. She had fought for justice, and in doing so, had become a voice for those who had been silenced for too long. And though the road ahead would be long and difficult, Maya was ready to face it head on.